Welcome to Paulogia, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians. Today with a little razzle-dazzle.
Thanks very much for having me, Paul. It's an absolute honor to be here, although some people might allege that I'm something of a cartoon in reality anyway.
Mystically conjured, straight from Ireland, the one and only Magic Skeptic.
I don't mind if people call me Magic Skeptic, but I'm happy for you to refer to me as Dara in this conversation. I quite like the title. For me, Magic Skeptic is an ironic nod to what I do, because I'm a magician, but I'm also a skeptic, and I find something of an irony in being a magician and a skeptic. Magic, in terms of the mythological sense of the word, actual magic is clearly, I would argue, at least as far as the evidence is concerned, diametrically opposed to the idea of skepticism, because there's not any good evidence in favor of so-called real magic.
And we're here to take a look at another video from I Am Beggar.
Is it I'm Beggar or I Am Beggar?
No idea.
If you wouldn't mind, I'm going to use I'm Beggar just for ease of pronunciation, because I feel like I'm going to trip over I Am Beggar. Is that okay?
Of course.
I'm Beggar channel is awesome, to be perfectly honest. The production quality is fantastic. The animations are brilliant. Fantastic sound quality. The arguments are presented so that the layman can access them. It's not incredibly technical. I think what the channel serves best as is a wonderful introduction to apologetics for anybody who wants to go down that road. I don't agree with him. But it makes my channel look like crap. I Am Beggar starting to roll off the tongue now, by the way, so I'll stick with that as well.
Sounds good. Here we go with Why Do I Need God? A Gentle Proposal.
I think a lot of us will say, well, I'm a good person. I try to be a good person, and I can figure stuff out on my own. And I got a good family, good friends, good life, all of which I did on my own, by the way. So what the heck do I need God for?
This question, this opening gambit, if you will, strikes me as a straw man. What the heck do I need God for? I feel like he's typifying the atheist position here, strawmanning it in a very unhelpful way, because I've never met an atheist who says, what the heck do I need God for? If anything, that kind of sentence structure or phraseology indicates to me a belief in a God. If I were to say, for example, what the heck do I need a car for? Or what the heck do I need Paul for? Surely that sentence structure presupposes the existence of the very thing that's referenced in the sentence, subject, if you will. And so when he puts this question forth as his opening gambit, I feel like we're already off to a shaky start.
If I may, I'm going to push back slightly here. In an attempt to steel man.
Sure.
I don't know about Ireland, but here in North America, we're experiencing the rise of the nuns. That is, the largest growing demographic segment is people who identify as no religion in particular.
Yes.
Now, atheism is obviously a subset of this, but the majority are just people who are apathetic. They don't bother to come to an informed conclusion about God one way or the other because they don't consider him relevant to their lives either way. I don't know, but I suspect it's this apathetic group that this video is geared toward, rather than someone who spent time investigating the matter and found evidence lacking.
You know what? Consider me persuaded. I think you're right. I think this video, I may have misunderstood the audience that he's trying to get the attention of here. And now that you say that, thinking about the video and how it proceeds, and this opening question or gambit, as I put it, yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think he's addressing the nuns.
Honestly, this used to be me. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to sit here and just say, oh, you need God because you're going to hell or you need to be saved. Because if somebody said that to me when I was at that stage, let's just say that wouldn't have gone over very well. And I probably would have shut the door to God forever. But instead, I hope this to be more like a proposal or an open invitation to something that I just really, really love. So just hear me out and then take it or leave it. It's totally up to you.
He's trying to create this kind of gentle atmosphere, a gentle welcome to the Christian faith. But I'm not so convinced that this is possible. It can only be possible insofar as you're willing to ignore certain details. While Beggar is saying that he's not going to talk about hell or judgment or anything of that nature because he fears that that would shut down the conversation, that it might put people off. I do think it's worth noting that this is still a specter that lurks in the background of the video. And of course, we'd have to get into particulars there insofar as, are we talking about a literal hell, or are we talking about simply being separated from God, or annihilation theory or something like that? The point is, it's more accurate to say that God is a person with a gun pointed to your head. Hell is God pulling the trigger, and salvation is God sparing your life. And as the hostage, you either love and worship the person with the gun for all eternity with blind obedience and live, or you're forced to die. They're forced to pull the trigger. Don't make me pull the trigger. What I Am Beggar has done in this video is just conceal the gun. God is now the guy holding the gun, but the gun is just inside the coat. So the invitation is gentler because the gun isn't on display, but the gun is still there. And so I don't actually appreciate this way of inviting people to something.
I've always loved the line, and I'm just going to say it my own way, that we think we're physical creatures seeking just some short experience of the spiritual. But in reality, we're spiritual creatures living just some short experience of the physical. Now, I don't care who you are, what you believe. I'm sure that resonates with every single one of us.
Nope.
Yeah, it's wonderfully condescending, isn't it? I don't care who you are and what you believe. This resonates with everyone. Nope. This is appalling. I'm sorry, but this is appalling.
I love when Christians tell me my own thoughts. It saves me so much thinking and work.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, this is incredibly problematic.
Because I think we all know it, whether we believe in it or not, that there has to be something else that goes way beyond just this world.
So yeah, this is incredibly problematic. He claims that we all know we're spiritual creatures, which, Paul, you clearly reject. I reject. I must have missed the memo. Did you, Paul?
You didn't get it.
No. All right. How could one even demonstrate this? This is the first thing that occurs to me, quote unquote. As well as being poorly defined, I would say, appears to be unfalsifiable. So when he says that there has to be something else that goes way beyond this world, that is just a statement of his own psychological certainty. It tells us nothing about what's in the world. When somebody says that there has to be something, that sounds to me like that person doesn't have very good evidence for what they're claiming. Scientists don't say there has to be a Big Bang, or evolution has to be true, or anything of the nature. They demonstrate that these things are true via investigation and so on. And some people are going to respond to this and say, oh, but all of those things are empirical. They're properties of the natural world and so on. And so how can you expect the soul to be investigated in the same way or in the same manner using the same tools? And to that I'll say, I'm not necessarily expecting that. I'm just looking for evidence in whatever shape or form it comes. And if you can give me evidence that is of a non-scientific variety that serves as a good epistemic warrant to believe in the soul, I'm all ears. But what you cannot do is just assert that it must be the case and assert that everybody knows that it's the case and not provide a shred of evidence for it, scientific or otherwise. That is incredibly uncompelling.
What I'm anticipating here is argument from consequences, where one tries to argue the truth of a hypothesis based on whether the premise leads to a desirable or undesirable consequence.
You hit the nail on the head.
Spoiler alert. All right.
And way beyond just get born, go to school, go to work, have a family, and die. There has to be.
Why? Again, why does there have to be more than that? And furthermore, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with get born, go to school, go to work, have a family, and die? As far as I can tell, that sounds like a wonderful life. That sounds great. I'm very, very lucky that I got to go to school and that I have a job. And I'm very, very lucky that I have a family. What's wrong with this? I don't see why this has to be a grim picture. I'm convinced that the finitude of life is what gives it its meaning. If my life were an infinite one, if my life never came to an end, I'm convinced that my life would lose all urgency. The reason I get up in the morning and go to work and try my best, the reason I'm sat here with you, Paul, and trying to, have this conversation is because I'm trying to make every single day count, because I feel like I have a finite number of them. And I think there's good reason to suspect that I have a finite number of them and that once I'm dead, I'm gone forever. And I don't think that has to be the negative picture that's being painted here. If anything, it's that fact that adds urgency and meaning to my life. Even if I'm wrong, even if the reality is that life sucks because we're going to die and then it's game over and we're gone forever. even if that sucks, and it really truly sucks, so what? Doesn't mean anything. Your desire for more than that is just a desire. Wish thinking isn't a reliable pathway to the truth. It simply isn't. Our disapproval isn't evidence of its falsehood.
You're not in North America, so, your mileage may vary, and you don't even use the word mileage.
I do, actually. In England, we use miles.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. What I observe of evangelical Christians is that they tend to rail against any idea they deem to be remotely socialist, because how dare people expect that anyone owe them anything? But when it comes to an afterlife, yes, the universe definitely owes everyone an afterlife. How could this be all? We're owed more.
And this isn't just wishful thinking. I think we know it because it's our experience. We feel it in that deep inner part of ourselves that hungers for something more.
Goodness, I could hardly keep a straight face.
Oh my God, this is hilarious. I'm sorry, I don't wish to be so insulting and condescending, but this is absolutely hilarious. So he alleges that this isn't wishful thinking because we all have something deep inside ourselves that hungers for something more. This is the most laughable contradiction I've ever had the pleasure of hearing. It's like saying, I'm not engaging in assertions. I'm just making claims without supporting evidence. I can't believe that he wrote that and it made the final edit. I mean, I don't want to get into ad hominem territory here, but yeah, look, I suppose the less I say here, the better. But this is noteworthy. Let's just leave it there, shall we?
I think it's fair to say that a yearning of your heart for something and wishful thinking are at very least synonymous.
Indeed.
Every single one of us is made up of both the physical and the spiritual. Now, our physical bodies hunger for the physical. Touch, food, water, warmth. And when we get these, we feel happy. But if we don't, our bodies feel sick and slowly die. Now, in the same way, our spirit or soul, or whatever you want to call it, hungers for the spiritual. Truth, as in those answers every single one of us are looking for. Love, as in every single one of us longs to be loved. But even deeper than that, I think we all hunger just to be accepted. And goodness, as in every single one of us wants to be good and wants what is good. And we all think we know what that is, but often we find out down the road that what we thought was good wasn't actually good for us at all.
Iron Beggar alleges that the spirit longs for love, truth, and goodness. But remember, folks, this isn't a wish fulfillment argument at all, right? I couldn't help myself. I had to put that call back in there. Definitely no wish fulfilling going on here at all. But what I'll say about this is the following. I'm not sure why he would categorize these things as spiritual in the first place. Why would anybody grant that love, truth, and goodness are spiritual things? Love, forgive me, I'm a reductionist. Love is a label that we put on a strong feeling of romantic attachment, as far as I can tell. And that doesn't
have to be, it needn't be romantic. It actually could just be affection in general.
That's fair.
I love my dog.
That's a great point. I'm guilty of thinking about my fiance far too much. You're right, because I love my mother, but that wouldn't be romantic love.
Right, but affection, I think we would agree.
Excellent. Yeah. A strong feeling of affection, right? And understanding that as being a composite of brain chemistry and neurons firing and biology and so on doesn't diminish it for me. And perhaps this is where the clash of worldviews really happens. Because when I engage in this kind of reductionist talk with theists, I'm frequently met with disdain or a sense of outrage or some description, right? They think that this is deflationary. And I guess it is definitionally deflationary. But I love the example that Sam Harris uses where he talks about the feeling that chocolate gives us. So if you like chocolate, as I do, when you bite into that chocolate, understanding how the molecular constituents of that chocolate interact with your tongue and your taste buds and your brain chemistry in order to produce an endorphin response and in order to satiate your sugar craving and so on. understanding what's going on there physiologically doesn't detract from the pleasure that you experience while consuming the chocolate. Nobody feels deflated. No one says, oh, stop ruining my bar of chocolate when you explain what's going on there at a molecular level. And I would argue that the same is true for love, although perhaps this is subjective. Maybe when you describe it this way to some people, they really do feel a sense of you're bursting their bubble. I'm just pointing out that perhaps people are being inconsistent in that regard, because if having your chocolate described to you physiologically doesn't detract from your positive experience of consuming the chocolate, then I would say that it shouldn't have a negative effect on your experience of love when it's explained in a reductionist manner either. But suffice to say, love, as far as I can tell, is just a label. It has nothing to do with spirituality or a spirit world, a supernatural or something like that. In terms of truth, according to my definition, truth is simply that which comports with reality. So I see no reason to put this in a spiritual category, an unfalsifiable category of spacelessness or intangibility or something like that. Truth is merely that which comports with reality, which is precisely why I'm skeptical about the existence of a spirit in the first place. I'm not convinced that spirit comes with reality. I haven't seen any evidence for it, and I Am Beggar certainly isn't providing any. But just to extend an olive branch, this video isn't intended to provide evidence for the existence of spirit, and so perhaps I Am Beggar has very good arguments for dualism in another video, and that can be a conversation for another day. But just to make the general point, I've not seen any persuasive evidence for the existence of spirit, which is why I'm convinced it does not comport with reality. And lastly, goodness is a label that we put on actions. I would say this because I'm an anti-realist. As far as I can tell, goodness is a label that we put on actions that align with our attitudes. So none of this, in my humble estimation, has anything to do with the supernatural or any kind of unfalsifiable spirit entity. And yet I Am Beggar just asserts and just alleges that all of these things are in the domain of the spiritual. Consider me unconvinced.
And when we get these things, we feel joy, which is different from happiness. Happiness comes from something on the outside. Joy comes from something on the inside.
Why? What? Who? This distinction between happiness and joy is entirely fine if he has his own special definitions that have some kind of special parsing separating the bone and marrow of this little specific conversation. But no, I mean, anyway, that's just me reacting live right now that I don't buy it.
No, I agree. I agree. It feels like a distinction without a difference. I think you're spot on. Although we want to avoid, which I think you've been very careful to, we want to avoid the specter of prescriptivism. We can't just import our definitions of these words and force them onto I Am Beggar and then use our definitions to allege that his distinction between joy and happiness is incorrect. And you've pointed that out yourself by mentioning that he might actually have a definition for these words that separates the bone from the marrow, as you put it. And so we have to be open to that possibility. But I think the common parlance understanding of these words makes them synonymous with one another, more or less. And you'd have to be splitting hairs to separate the bone from the marrow there. I think that's a fair.
The verse I was quoting, Hebrews 4:12, the word of God is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. I just realized that 30 seconds ago, I Am Beggar dismissed any distinction between soul and spirit.
Or spirit or soul or whatever you want to call it.
When the Bible says those two things can be divided from each other. Sorry, that's really random.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that quote, Paul. I hadn't heard that. So again, it's a treat to be here because you're teaching me as we go here. No, that's fantastic.
But when we don't, our souls feel sick and slowly die. And that's what we feel in that inner emptiness or restlessness of heart.
So, I Am Beggar alleges that a feeling of inner emptiness or restlessness of heart is evidence of the soul, quote-unquote, dying. This is preposterous, as far as I can tell, by my lights. This is straight out of the woo playbook. The proprietor of whatever woo is on offer identifies some of the body and then sells you their cure, quote-unquote. We all feel empty sometimes. But that isn't proof of a soul, and it doesn't mean that you need woo of any description. We all feel empty sometimes, a feeling of emptiness or feeling like you've got no direct life. Maybe it could be coupled with a sense of hopelessness or nihilism or something like that. I would recommend a good mental health professional if you have serious psychological issues, or even if you don't. I suspect seeing a mental health professional or sitting down with a counselor is good for everybody. And just to be clear, I'm not a mental health professional. This video isn't about giving people medical guidance. I'm just pointing out that if you're a person who's struggling with a medical problem, be it psychological or what have you, then you should consult the relevant professionals. And a healthy diet and exercise and all these things can be useful in order to escape a feeling of emptiness or restlessness of heart. I'm not convinced that jumping head first into medieval myth is going to be the cure for what ails you. It's kind of like the snake oil salesman, right? I mean, you identify the woo and then you sell the audience your cure. And in this case, I'm Beggar is selling the cure of Christianity. And I guess I just don't buy that it's a cure. Although I suppose, just to extend an olive branch, of course it's possible to derive a sense of meaning from religious faith. Of course it is. Faith can be the tide that binds sometimes. I remember this from when I was religious. There were days where I felt better precisely because of my faith. It could be something that might help you get through grief or something like that. There are ways in which your faith can help, but there are secular alternatives. I guess that's all I'm drawing the listener's attention to. I don't think you need the woo in order to feel better. There are other ways of getting through tough times.
This is the classic vague threat is better than specific threat move.
Give them an open-ended threat. Nothing specific. That way, their fertile little imaginations fill in the gap with the worst thing they can think of.
You get your tail in better, you won't like what happens next.
Which is the kids' room?
It's an equivocal word. There's something, what you're referring to there in terms of the vagaries that are contained within fortune cookie statements or star sign, astrological readings and all this kind of woo. You're referring to what are called Barnum statements, which goes back to P.T. Barnum, himself a magician. Barnum statements are statements that are vague but have the illusion of sounding specific. It's something that cold readers and people in my area, magicians, and well, although magicians will tell you honestly that they're deceiving you, the people who are actually trying to sell woo as though it's real, the fortune tellers, the mediums, and the psychics, they use cold reading techniques and Barnum statements to give the air of specificity whilst actually saying nothing. So I could do one right now. I'm speaking to the listener right now. So I bet that you go to and you find that sometimes you are the center of attention and that people are hanging on your every word and they're laughing and you're having a great time and you're just really, loose and automatic and smooth and it's all going very well and it's fantastic. But then, weirdly, when you come home from that part, you find yourself and perhaps even overthinking, should I have said this? Should I have done that? Maybe I won't go to the next party. I don't know if I made a bit of a fool of myself. And I'll just pause it right there. This sounds like a very specific psychological account of somebody's life.
It does.
But all I've really said there is that you have an introverted side and you have an extroverted side. But if I had worded it that way, it would be uncompelling. But if I take on the guise of a medium or somebody who's in deep psychological synchronicity with you, and I have a candle on the table and we're in a darkly lit atmospheric room, and I'm the person who allegedly has powers and you're hanging on my every word, suddenly that reading can take on very real, kind of profound meaning to somebody. And by the way, this particular reading is not original to me. I'm going to credit Darren Brown there, who's an incredibly successful magician who lives in the UK, a touring magician. He's an astonishing talent. So credit where credit is due there. But yeah, suffice to say, Paul, using a word is as equivocal as empty. There is an attempt here, a strategic attempt to capture as much of the audience as possible, because strategy was to ignore the gun in the coat and to not talk about hell and judgment. And strategy number 2 is to use terminology that's as encompassing as possible, such that this video can reach the widest possible audience.
Did you notice the sound design on these particular words? As someone involved with filmmaking in general, just the dissonant sound effects that he put on those words to make you feel like they weren't already making you uncomfortable. He's using the sound design to make you even further uncomfortable.
In that inner emptiness, or restlessness of heart.
Yeah, you're right. That does make me feel uncomfortable. That does. That's good sound design. Ian Beggar could make a great horror movie.
Some may argue he has.
A horror movie called Christianity.
Now, I know some of you are thinking, yeah, but why are these things spiritual? Well, ask yourself, are these things in their most perfect, purest form something we've invented or something we discover? For example, math. 1 + 1 = 2 is still true, even if there were no universe. So math is something we discover, not something we invented. But it has to come from somewhere.
Are these things something we invented or something we discover? This seems like a false dichotomy to me right off the bat.
Well, certainly it's not a dichotomy, because a true dichotomy here would be it's either invented or not invented, and it's discovered or not discovered. Those are the dichotomies that you could possibly put into play here.
There are things that are neither discovered nor invented. He alleges that these things must have come from somewhere. And there's two problems I have with this. There are things we discover that are clearly not spiritual. For example, we discovered fire, farming, evolution, the Big Bang, etc. It's not obvious that any of these things have anything to do with spirit or the supernatural. So the fact that something is discovered does not render it spiritual. Second problem, his math analogy, in my view, blows up in his face. Because if you assume the truth of mathematical realism, he says that 1 + 1 is equal to 2, even if there were no universe. The problem is that this would also be the case if there were no God. So math is based on the laws of logic, and they appear to be true even if there is no God. If there were no universe, it would still be the case that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. If indeed there were no God, then it would be true to say that God does not exist. It would be false to say that he does, and it's not obvious to me that something can be both true and false at the same time. Ergo, even without God, you have the three logical absolutes: the law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. All I'm saying right now is that it's not obvious to me that a God is necessary to ground any of this. He just uses the phrase, they must have come from somewhere. And this is a rhetorical device that he's used now a couple of times in this video already. And all I can say is that it's uncompelling. So if this video is supposed to serve as an invitation to people to join your worldview, all I can say is that it's going to fail insofar as if your audience is philosophically informed, they're going to see these glaring problems and it's going to affect the quality of your invitation.
So these basic fundamental truths predate us, but they have to come from somewhere. And that somewhere is what we've been searching for since the beginning of time.
And it's not clear to me that this is the case. He says that love, truth, and goodness predate us and they have to come from somewhere. And that somewhere is what we've been searching for since the beginning of time, for some kind of spirit world or something of that nature. And so I would just take issue with somebody describing what I'm yearning for. I find that to be deeply condescending. But let's table that for a moment. It's certainly true the universe and its operation, and by extension the laws of logic or math, which even Ian Beggar accepts would apply even if the universe didn't exist, that definitely predates us. But it's not obvious to me that that's the case for love and goodness. Did love exist before life formed? And I say life here because I don't want to rule out the possibility that other species might have had the capacity for affection. So I'll just say life just to make it general. I see no good reason to believe that. And it's not clear to me that goodness predates life, because goodness to me, as an anti-realist, is simply an expression of our attitudes, and attitudes can't exist if there are no conscious creatures. Now, you could allege that they existed in the mind of God, but that's the very thing that's in contention here. Lest you be accused of question begging, that's not a very wise retort. So, yeah, human beings are searching for enrichment and love, generally speaking, and we want to be successful and so on. But it doesn't follow that these are spiritual or religious quests, and asserting that they predate us, with the exception of logic, it's not obvious to me at all that love and goodness predate us, because love and goodness are within the domain of conscious creatures. And so, yeah, I would push back on that as well, Paul.
Okay, bear with me here. The best way I've ever heard to put this all together is something I'm going to steal from Fulton Sheen. Now, there are 3 levels in life, and every single one of us wants what is best, or what is higher. We're just built that way.
That's too bold a claim. Not every single person is seeking something higher.
Now, the bottom level is all about the carnal, pleasure, vanity, feeding my senses. As long as it looks good and I feel good doing it, then I don't really care about anything else. The second level is the level of intellectual enlightenment, all human knowledge, the arts and sciences, culture and society, humanity and the common good. Now, this level is much more grand than the first, but it only goes as far as our human understanding. The third level is the level of the spiritual, basically everything else that goes beyond what we can see and touch, and beyond all our human understanding.
If it's impervious to our senses, this spiritual realm, if it's beyond what we can see and touch, and beyond all human understanding, if that's the case, it's impervious to our senses, right? We can't possibly discover it or say anything about it. This admission renders the whole video kind of nonsensical. The video now becomes, hey, let me tell you what I know about the unknowable. And that just seems like a bit of a joke. And apologists are frequently engaging in statements like this. This is something that needs to be challenged. You cannot, in your first breath, say that it's beyond our senses and beyond our understanding, and then in the next breath say, so let me tell you about it. That just seems like utter incoherent nonsense to me.
This is where we find the source of pure truth that every single one of our minds was designed to seek, of pure love that every single one of our hearts was made to be filled with and to share.
I think for the sake of time, we're just going to let some anatomical questionability here slide.
Yeah, that's fair.
And the pure, perfect good that every single one of our souls desires.
Feel like there's exceptions.
Agreed.
And just as flesh and blood can only come from flesh and blood, spirit can only come from spirit.
Flesh and blood can only come from flesh and blood, I am beggar. This isn't clear at all. We may well discover one day that life came from non-life, so-called abiogenesis. But leaving that aside, his own theology debunks this. Humanity, flesh and blood, was created by God, which is spirit. Out of the dirt. Checkmate, right?
Wow.
I mean,
yes.
what? Like, I'm sorry, but that's checkmate. Not even his own theology agrees with this supposition of his. So I don't know where he got that from.
And this first pure spirit is where we come from, which explains why we sometimes feel homesick for something that we don't even know what it is.
Arnhem.
Yes.
I've learned something new and I'm going to use it.
Now, if we live our lives down here in the basement, we're bored, miserable, and we don't get anywhere. Bored because any pleasure done in repetition only leads to boredom. Miserable because we're searching for all these things and things where clearly they can't be found. And we don't go anywhere because there's no development of our minds. Now, I'd say most of us probably live here, and we're good, loving, intelligent people. More or less, because there's all the shades of these things here, but never in their fullness. And we live comfortable lives in our comfortable homes, watching Netflix and ball games, and we're happy. Enough. But deep down, there's still a dullness. Something's still missing. And we ask ourselves, is this all there is? And inevitably we find ourselves at the crossroads, where we start searching for this, or go back down here.
Beggar goes on to argue here, or infer at the very least, that religion, or Christianity more specifically, is the cure to what he describes as dullness. Dullness is an equivocal term, not a univocal one. There's vagaries here with the language, and so dullness is a word that could mean many things in many contexts. But I just want to draw the listener's attention to the following. What about all of the secular countries who self-report as being the happiest in the world? But the World Happiness Report, which came out in 2023, lists the top 10 happiest countries from 1 to 10. Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Israel, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and New Zealand. The vast majority of those countries in that top 10 are secular countries where people are either atheistic or agnostic, or what you might describe, Paul, as the nuns. These people are self-reporting as the happiest in the world, and yet they're not religious more generally. And so I would just challenge this idea that in the absence of religion, we're just doomed to nihilism or dullness or sadness or what have you. I mean, if your listeners will forgive the supremely anecdotal nature of this singular example, my life has been infinitely improved, if you'll forgive the exaggeration, by becoming secular and atheist. My life is much better now than it ever was when I was a Christian. My life has so much more happiness and joy and intellectual enrichment now. I get to have conversations like this one with fucking Paulogia. It's precisely because I'm an atheist. My life is so much more intellectually enriching and fulfilling as an atheist than what it ever was as a theist. We're all different. I'm open to the possibility that maybe some people might need faith. I don't know. I don't want to come across as condescending. I don't want to be the guy who says I don't need it, but maybe some of those idiots over there do. I do think anybody can be an atheist. I think some people feel they need it because they were indoctrinated into it. Suffice to say, I would challenge this notion that in the absence of Christianity or religion that your life is going to be dull or unfulfilling. My life serves as evidence to the contrary, and the data that I've just read about the people who report as being the happiest in the world, the countries who are at the top of the list are overwhelmingly secular and atheistic.
I know that the classic Maslow's hierarchy of needs model has fallen somewhat out of favor, and for reasons that would definitely also apply to I Am Beggar's house model here as well. But Maslow's acknowledges that love and belonging tend to be the desires after physical needs and safety. And this, frankly, is where Christianity shines. The fulfillment from Christianity comes largely here. It also feeds this theme. You're a child of God now. And self-actualization. God has a purpose unique for you. We don't really need to even posit this hypothetical supernatural top floor to explain the perceived utility of Christianity within a human need hierarchy.
I think you're absolutely spot on when you say that he's left out some crucial elements here, which could be alienating to people. I love the reference to the hierarchy of needs, not least because I'm a teacher myself.
I think there are actually very few of us who live here. I wish I could say you're one of them, but I'm not. I think like many of us, I fight my battles on all three. But I know it's there, and I know it's real.
Hang on. I thought the spiritual world was, quote, beyond what we can see and touch and beyond all our human understanding. So how can you know it's there? What sense have you used to deduce this? How have you come to know the unknowable? I don't know. When you say that something is, that we're sensorially blocked from something, God is hidden because God doesn't want us to have direct knowledge of his existence. But he kind of still wants us to know in an indirect way, but then it was direct with Jesus, but not now. So we're going to have to figure it out by some other method, but it's not apprehendable by our senses. But we just kind of know. I just think this is just a hodgepodge and a mess. It's almost like self-refuting. If you're going to say that it's unknowable and that we're sensorially blocked from it, it's bizarre to then say, but I just know it's there. How is this indistinguishable from, this thing exists? How do you know? I just know. Well, I'm sorry. That doesn't work, I'm afraid, and nobody should take it seriously. I think there are apologists who would actually be frustrated with this kind of rhetoric, because there are apologists who, they try, at the very least, to provide evidences for what they're claiming. Extending the olive branch, this video isn't meant to be a proof of God's existence, but he does seem to be delving into some existential territory on why you should believe it. And when it just takes the form of bald-assed assertions, I just think you do yourself a disservice, and you're going to put people off who are looking for more than just assertions.
And once we get just the tiniest little glimpse of it, we're like, that's it. That's what I need. And you can tell right away the people who do live here, because they're marked with an unshakable peace.
That is not my experience.
No, nor mine. So spiritual people have a quote-unquote unshakable peace. Well, tell that to those suffering from religious trauma syndrome. Tell that to those who wake up every night screaming because of dreams of hellfire. Tell that to the members of the LGBTQ plus community who are sexually repressed because they've been indoctrinated into believing that their nature or that their sexual preferences or that their gender is sinful. These so-called spiritual people living spiritual lives don't appear to have much in the way of peace. I'm not denying that religion can create a sense of comfort for some. I'm just pushing back on this oft-granted notion that religion confers comfort. That is not a universal experience, far from it, and there are millions of people who live in the world today who can testify as to the ridiculousness of that assertion. Being spiritual and or religious does not necessarily give you unshakable peace. If anything, it can give you unshakable anxiety, depression, and PTS fucking D. But anyway.
Let's say there was life on another dimension. Now, we could rationalize and theorize and try to postulate some idea of what it might be like there. But unless we actually go there or somebody from there comes here, we have no idea. So this is where God made it easy for us. He took all this, all truth, goodness, and love, everything through which you and I and all of existence was created, everything that actually is himself. And he embodied it into a human person.
I am bigger that God made it easy for us by sending Christ. There might actually be a nugget of wisdom in that statement. If you were alive at the time of Christ and you were witnessing this guy who went around and multiplied the loaves and the fishes, that might be enough for someone who witnessed that to believe in a God. There are good skeptical reasons to still doubt there. Perhaps you're subject to a deception. Maybe Jesus was just a magician who was performing tricks. Maybe you are subject to a misapprehension. Let's assume you witnessed it and you're convinced that what you witnessed is real. It might be easier to believe in God because they witnessed these miraculous things. But that's not the case for me in 2024, because I didn't see any of that happen, and the evidence that exists for it having happened is scant at best. I have to trust a Bible is itself just a compendium of claims. The extra biblical evidence for these things happening isn't excellent. Even if it was, just because lots of people agreed that a guy did a miracle doesn't mean that I have good epistemic justification for believing a guy did a miracle right now. You can meet people today, right now, you can go and speak to them yourself, people who will tell you that they witnessed the miracles of Sati Sai Baba, the Indian guru. And yet Christians aren't falling to their knees and becoming Hindus. You can meet people who will tell you that they've been abducted by aliens and not going to believe in the saucer people. To infer from that God made it easy for us in 2024 to believe this, I'm not being I want to believe what's true. If God is real and somebody can provide compelling evidence for that, and it's the Christian God, I'll be in church Sunday morning, right? I'm not being obtuse. God hasn't made it easy, because if it was easy to believe in him, I'd believe in him. And yet I don't, which says something about how easy it might be. So unless you're going to just accuse me of dishonesty or being obtuse, then we're kind of at an impasse.
So as I said in the beginning, I hope this to be more like an open invitation that we have our entire lives to respond to. And it doesn't come from me. And the invitation is simple.
Come home.
Come home. So, shockingly enough, I never would have thought it, but we conclude with the inevitable leap to Christ, who can help us reach the spiritual dimension as he embodies love, truth, goodness, yada, yada, yada. Who allegedly invites us very gently and lovingly, quote unquote. Let's just forget the parable of the sheep and the goats where Jesus threatens everybody with hell. Let's just forget the gun that's lurking beneath the coat. This is a gentle invitation. Yeah, whatever. That's my final comment. Whatever. So consider my my answer to the invitation a big fat no.
My comment is, what was the answer to the question, why do I need God? So what you've given me is you've told me there's a party happening on the third floor and you'll be missing, like it's a FOMO situation. You'll be missing out of what's happening on the third floor. Cool. All right. So I'm missing out on the rager on third floor. Why do I need God? Did that get answered?
I don't think so. I think if we were to steel man it or to just offer the best possible interpretation, my assumption is that he thinks we need God because without God, we're going to live a life that is dull and lacking in enrichment. That without God, we're going to be sad, we're going to be unhappy, we're going to be restless of heart, as he put it. So if we were to summarize it, you need God because without God, you're going to live an unfulfilled, dull life. I think that's the claim.
Okay, but the same is true of an air fryer. My life will be not quite as good as if I had an air fryer. But that doesn't mean I need an air fryer.
Yes. I suppose it depends on how we define the word need.
I think so. And then we need to go back to the Maslow's hierarchy again, whereas like needs becomes increasingly in quotes. So, okay, so I didn't miss it. God is a quality of life improvement.
Yes. Yeah, basically. Yeah. God is like an air conditioner.
Very good. All right. Well, I feel like that might go on the thumbnail. God is like an air conditioner. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, if you watched this far, you should definitely head immediately to Dara's YouTube channel, The Magic Skeptic, where he waxes philosophical, skeptical, and illusional on all manner of religious analysis and counter-apologetics that I know you're going to love. Please subscribe for his excellent content and leave a comment to let him know that Paulogia sent you.
I've had such a great time talking to you tonight. I hope my ramblings will be useful and that I live up to the excellent name that your channel has.
Until next time, later.